The cantina on Nexus Station was filled with smoke and the bitter smell of a dozen different alien drinks. Commander Zexhai sat alone in the corner booth, his 4 arms wrapped around a glass of Carillion whiskey. His scaled skin bore the scars of 20 years of military service, and his yellow eyes held the haunted look that all veterans knew too well. The young recruits at the next table were talking loudly about their upcoming deployment. Fresh faces from the Galactic Defense Academy, full of hope and dreams of glory. Zexhai remembered being that young once, before the war with the Void Hunters changed everything. Before he learned what real monsters looked like. "I heard the humans are sending a battalion to support us," one of the recruits said, his voice carrying across the cantina. The speaker was a tall Altarian with blue skin and silver hair. "Should make the mission easier." Zexhai's hand tightened around his glass. Humans. Even now, 5 years after the war ended, the word made his scales stand on end. Humans, another recruit laughed. This one was a Kelleran with 6 eyes and a beak-like mouth. Those pink mammals? They only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. What could they possibly do that we can't? The third recruit, a female Vorthan with tentacles instead of hair, nodded in agreement. "I heard they don't even have natural armor or claws. How did they survive on their home world without proper defenses?" Zexhai stood up so fast that his chair scraped against the metal floor. The sound was loud enough to make half the cantina look in his direction. He walked over to the recruit's table, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Did you just say you're going to be fighting alongside humans?" The Altarian recruit looked up with wide eyes. "Yes, sir. Is there a problem?" Zexhai sat down without being invited. The recruits shifted nervously as they took in his scarred appearance and the row of military decorations on his chest. "Kid, let me tell you something about humans," Zexhai began, taking a long drink from his glass. "And I want you to listen very carefully because your life might depend on it." The cantina had gone almost completely silent. Even the bartender, a massive Gorvok with rock-like skin, was leaning forward to listen. 5 years ago, I was a colonel in the 47th Assault Division. We were tasked with defending the mining colonies in the Kepler sector from Void Hunter raids. Nasty business. The Void Hunters were these insectoid aliens with acid for blood and claws that could cut through starship hulls. Zexhai paused to take another drink. "We've been fighting them for 3 years. Lost a lot of good soldiers. The colonies were barely hanging on, and command was talking about evacuation. That's when the humans showed up." The Kelleran recruit leaned forward. "What happened?" "At first, we didn't think much of them," Zexhai continued. "They were smaller than most of us, no natural weapons, no armor plating. Their ships were crude compared to ours, barely better than civilian transports. We figured they'd be support troops at best." He set his glass down and looked directly at each recruit. "We were wrong. Dead wrong." A Thraxian merchant at a nearby table had stopped eating to listen. Several off-duty security guards had moved closer. Stories from the Void Hunter War were rare, and stories about humans were rarer still. "The first time I saw humans in action was at the Battle of Kepler Prime," Zexhai said. "The Void Hunters had broken through our lines and were overrunning the main colony. 30,000 civilians trapped, with about 500 hunters between them and safety." His yellow eyes took on a distant look. "My battalion was pinned down in the industrial district. We've been fighting for 6 hours straight, and we were down to our last ammunition packs. The hunters had us surrounded, and their reinforcements were coming through the portal." "What about the humans?" the Vorthan recruit asked quietly. "They weren't even supposed to be in that sector," Zexhai replied. "Command had assigned them to rear guard duty, protecting the supply lines. But when they heard what was happening," he shook his head. "They just showed up." The old veteran stood and walked to the cantina's main viewport. Outside, ships from a dozen different species moved through the traffic lanes around Nexus Station. It was peaceful now, but Zexhai could still remember when space was a war zone. "I was lying behind an overturned hover truck, trying to stop the bleeding from a claw wound in my side, when I heard something I'd never heard before," he said. "Human battle cries. But They weren't screams of fear or anger. They were different, cold, calculated. He turned back to face the recruits. The humans came through the hunter lines like they weren't even there. But it wasn't their weapons that impressed me, though those were effective enough. It was the way they moved, the way they thought. What do you mean? The Altarian asked. Every other species fights with emotion, Zexhai explained. We get angry, or afraid, or desperate. We make mistakes when our blood is up. The hunters fought with pure instinct, like wild animals. But the humans, they stayed calm. In the middle of a battle where soldiers were dying all around them, they stayed completely calm. He sat back down at the recruits' table. I watched a human sergeant named Martinez organize a flanking maneuver while Hunter Acid was melting the wall behind him. Never raised his voice. Never panicked. Just gave orders like he was planning a training exercise. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed quieter. They didn't just fight the hunters, Zexhai continued. They studied them. While the rest of us were trying to survive, the humans were taking notes, recording behavior patterns, testing different tactics to see what worked best. That doesn't sound very impressive, the Kelran recruit said with a nervous laugh. Any good soldier analyzes the enemy. Zexhai's expression darkened. Kid, you don't understand. They were doing this while being shot at. I saw a human medic treating wounded soldiers while simultaneously giving tactical advice to her commanding officer about hunter movement patterns. She'd mapped their entire attack formation in her head while performing surgery. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. And then there was what happened when the hunters took prisoners. The recruits exchanged glances. Everyone knew what void hunters did to prisoners. It wasn't something that was discussed in polite company. The hunters captured a squad of human marines, Zexhai said. 12 soldiers. We all knew they were dead, so we wrote them off and continued with our defense. Standard protocol. You can't risk more lives trying to save soldiers who are already lost. But the humans didn't see it that way, he continued. Their commanding officer, a colonel named Richards, immediately began planning a rescue mission. When I pointed out that it was suicide, that we needed every soldier for the defense, you know what he said to me? The recruits shook their heads. He said, Colonel, we don't leave our people behind. Ever. And then he took 50 volunteers and went after them. Zexhai took another drink, his hands trembling slightly. I thought I'd never see any of them again. 50 humans charging into hunter territory to save 12 soldiers who were probably already dead. It was madness. What happened? The Vorthan recruit whispered. They came back, Zexhai said. All of them. The 50 rescuers and the 12 prisoners. But that wasn't the impressive part. He stood again and began pacing. The impressive part was what they did to the hunter encampment. They didn't just rescue their people. They destroyed the entire base. Killed every hunter in it. And they did it without losing a single human life. The Altarian recruit frowned. How is that possible? The hunters are some of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy. That's what I thought too, Zexhai replied. So I asked Colonel Richards how they'd done it. You know what he said? He said they turned the hunters' strengths against them. The old veteran sat back down and looked directly at each recruit. The hunters were faster than humans, stronger, better armed. But they relied on fear and intimidation. They expected their enemies to panic, to make mistakes. The humans never panicked. While the hunters were trying to terrify them, the humans were setting traps. They'd figured out that hunters have poor night vision, so they cut the power to the base. They discovered that hunter acid doesn't work on certain alloys, so they used those materials for shields. They turned every hunter advantage into a disadvantage. Zexhai paused to finish his drink. But the real shock came later when I was helping process the rescued prisoners. I expected them to be traumatized, broken. The hunters are experts at psychological torture. Were they hurt? The Kelran recruit asked. Physically, yes. Some of them were in bad shape. But mentally, Zexhai shook his head. They were taking notes. Even while being tortured, they'd been gathering intelligence about hunter psychology, hunter weaknesses, hunter base layouts. They turned their own capture into a reconnaissance mission. The recruits stared at him in disbelief. One of the prisoners, a young private named Chun, had memorized the entire base layout while being held in a cell. Another one, Sergeant Williams, had figured out the Hunters' command structure just by listening to their conversations. They'd been prisoners for 3 days, and they came out knowing more about the enemy than our intelligence division had learned in 3 years of war. A server approached their table, but HFY waved her away. He wasn't finished with his story. That was my first real look at how humans think, he said. But it wasn't until the Battle of the Binary Suns that I truly understood what they are. What happened there? The Vorthan recruit asked. HFY's expression grew even darker. The Hunters had set a trap. They'd leaked information about a major supply depot, knowing we'd try to capture it. When we arrived, we found ourselves facing the largest Hunter force anyone had ever seen. 300 ships, 30,000 ground troops. We had maybe a tenth of their numbers. Any reasonable commander would have retreated, he continued. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in the open. The smart move would have been to fall back and call for reinforcements. But the humans had a different idea, the Altarian guessed. The human admiral, a woman named Sarah Chun, called for an emergency conference with all the senior officers, HFY said. When we got there, she had a plan. Not a retreat plan, an attack plan. The old veteran laughed, but it was a harsh sound with no humor in it. She wanted to attack. All of us, every ship, every soldier, straight at the main Hunter fleet. I thought she'd lost her mind. That does sound crazy, the Kelran recruit admitted. That's what I said. But then she started explaining her reasoning. HFY rubbed his scar temple. She'd analyzed every major Hunter victory from the past 50 years. She'd found a pattern that none of us had noticed. He looked around the cantina, making sure everyone was still listening. The Hunters always won through overwhelming force and intimidation. They relied on their enemies being afraid, making defensive mistakes. But they'd never faced an enemy that actively sought out the most dangerous possible fight. What do you mean? The Vorthan asked. Humans don't think like the rest of us, HFY explained. When we see a superior enemy force, we look for ways to avoid destruction. We try to minimize risk. But humans look for ways to win anyway. They don't just accept the odds they're given. They find ways to change the odds. Admiral Chun had realized that the Hunter formation was designed to counter a defensive strategy, he continued. Their entire battle plan assumed we'd try to protect ourselves. But if we did the opposite, if we attacked with everything we had, their formation would actually work against them. The recruits were leaning forward now, completely absorbed in the story. So that's what we did, HFY said. Every ship, every fighter, every soldier. We charged straight at the center of their fleet. It should have been suicide, but it wasn't. It was the most decisive victory in the entire war, HFY replied. We destroyed their entire fleet and captured their command ship. The Hunter invasion force was so completely broken that they never mounted another major offensive. He stood and walked back to the viewport. But the real lesson wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about how humans think about problems. The cantina was so quiet that the only sound was the distant hum of the station's engines. Every other species has limits, HFY said. Things we won't do, lines we won't cross, risks we won't take. We have instincts that tell us when something is too dangerous, too crazy, too impossible. He turned back to face the recruits. Humans don't seem to have those limits. When they decide something needs to be done, they'll find a way to do it, no matter how impossible it seems. After the war ended, I did some research on human history, he continued. Do you know what I found? The recruits shook their heads. I found out that humans are the only species in galactic history to evolve as apex predators on a death world, HFY said. Every other intelligent species evolved as either prey animals or omnivores on relatively peaceful planets. But humans? They evolved as hunters on a planet where everything was trying to kill them. What does that mean? The Altarian recruit asked. It means that humans are genetically programmed to see every problem as something to be hunted and killed, HFY explained. They don't just fight, they hunt. There's a difference. He sat back down and looked directly at each recruit. When you fight, you're trying to defend yourself or drive off an attacker. When you hunt, you're trying to track down and destroy your target completely. Humans don't fight wars. They hunt enemies. That's why I'm warning you, he said. If you're going to be serving alongside humans, you need to understand what they are. They're not just another allied species. They're predators. The most dangerous predators in the galaxy. But they're on our side, the Vorthan recruit pointed out. Yes, they are, Zexai agreed. And thank the stars for that. But you need to remember that they're predators first and allies second. If you understand that, you'll be fine. If you forget it, he shrugged. Well, just don't forget it. The old veteran stood and dropped some credits on the table. I need to get some sleep. My ship leaves for the Outer Rim in the morning. Commander, the Altarian recruit called out as Zexai started to walk away. Is there anything else we should know about working with humans? Zexai paused and turned back. Just remember that humans don't lose. They might retreat, they might regroup, they might change tactics. But they don't lose. If you're fighting beside them, you're going to win. Just try to keep up. As he walked toward the exit, the cantina slowly began to return to its normal noise level. But the recruits remained silent, processing everything they heard. Do you think he was telling the truth? The Kelran recruit whispered. Before anyone could answer, the bartender, who had been listening to every word, leaned across the bar. I was at the Battle of the Binary Suns, he said in his deep, rumbling voice. Everything the commander told you is true. Every word. The recruits looked at each other with new understanding. Tomorrow, they would meet their human allies for the first time. And now they had some idea of what they were dealing with. 3 days later, the transport ship Galactic Unity dropped out of hyperspace near the military staging area in the Kepler system. The same 3 recruits who had listened to Commander Zexai's warning were now standing in the main hangar bay, waiting to meet their human counterparts for the first time. Lieutenant Kael'tar, the Altarian, checked his equipment for the 10th time in as many minutes. His blue skin had taken on a nervous purple tinge, and his silver hair kept falling into his eyes despite his attempts to smooth it back. Stop fidgeting, Ensign Veltar, the Vorthan female, whispered to him. Her tentacles were braided in the traditional pre-battle pattern, but they kept twitching with anxiety. You're making me nervous. I can't help it, Kael'tar replied. After what Commander Zexai told us, I don't know what to expect. The third member of their squad, Corporal Crixhai of the Kelran species, was using all 6 of his eyes to scan the hangar bay. The human transport is docking now, he reported. Bay 7. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see a human military transport connecting to the station's docking clamps. It was smaller than they'd expected and definitely less impressive than the sleek Galactic Defense Force ships surrounding it. The hull was a dull gray color with scorch marks and what looked like battle damage that had been hastily repaired. It looks old, Veltar observed. Maybe that's how humans like their ships, Kael'tar suggested. Functional instead of beautiful. The hangar bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and the human delegation began to emerge. The first figure through the airlock was clearly the commanding officer, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and intense green eyes. She wore the same type of military uniform as her companions, but hers bore the insignia of a colonel. Following her were 12 human soldiers, each carrying equipment packs and weapons that looked surprisingly basic compared to standard Galactic Defense Force gear. But there was something about the way they moved that immediately caught the recruits' attention. Look at how they walk, Crixhai whispered. So purposeful. It was true. Every human moved with a fluid efficiency that spoke of perfect coordination and constant awareness. Their eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, and they maintained a formation that allowed them to cover all angles of approach without appearing to do so. They're not just walking, Veltar realized. They're hunting. The human colonel approached the waiting Galactic Defense Force officers and rendered a crisp military salute. Colonel Sarah Martinez, 3rd Human Expeditionary Force. Reporting as ordered. Commander Thexval, a massive Gorvok who served as the station's military coordinator, returned the salute. "Welcome to Kepler Station, Colonel. We're glad to have human support for this operation." "Thank you, Commander. My people are ready to begin operations immediately." Kael'tar noticed that the Colonel's voice was calm and controlled, but there was something underneath it, an edge that suggested she was constantly evaluating everything around her for potential threats or opportunities. "If I may ask," Commander Thexval said, "your transport appears to have seen recent combat. Are your forces at full strength?" Colonel Martinez smiled, and it was not a particularly reassuring expression. "We encountered a raider patrol on the way here. They thought they could take a prize. They were wrong." "What happened to the raiders?" "They won't be bothering anyone else," Martinez replied simply. Kael'tar felt a chill run down his spine. The way she said it, so matter-of-factly, made it clear that the human force had not just driven off the raiders. They had eliminated them entirely. "Excellent," Commander Thexval said. "Perhaps you could brief us on your capabilities?" "Of course." Sergeant Williams, one of the human soldiers, stepped forward. He was tall and lean, with scars on his face and hands that spoke of extensive combat experience. "Sir, we have a full platoon of assault infantry, specialized in close-quarters combat and hostile environment operations. We're equipped with standard energy weapons, explosive devices, and advanced reconnaissance gear." "And your combat experience?" Commander Thexval asked. "We've been fighting continuously for the past 18 months, Williams replied. "Mostly against pirate groups and separatist movements. Before that, we served in the Void Hunter War." Several alien officers exchanged glances. Veterans of the Void Hunter War were rare and highly respected. "How many engagements?" Thexval pressed. 47 major battles, 136 minor skirmishes, and countless individual actions," Williams said without hesitation. "We've never failed to complete a mission objective." The confidence in his voice wasn't boastful. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to report the weather. "Impressive," Thexval admitted. "And your casualty rates?" For the first time, Williams hesitated. "We've lost good people, Commander, but our survival rate is significantly higher than Galactic Defense Force averages." "How much higher?" 47% higher, sir." A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Casualty rates were always a sensitive subject, but a 47% improvement was almost impossible to believe. "How do you account for such remarkable results?" Thexval asked. Colonel Martinez stepped forward again. "Commander, human military doctrine differs significantly from standard GDF protocols. We emphasize aggressive action, rapid decision-making, and what we call overwhelming local superiority." "Could you elaborate?" "We don't believe in fair fights," Martinez said bluntly. "When we engage an enemy, we do everything possible to ensure that we have every possible advantage. Superior numbers, superior position, superior firepower, superior intelligence. We stack the deck in our favor before the shooting starts. And if you can't achieve those advantages..." Martinez smiled that cold smile again. "Then we create them." Kael'tar was beginning to understand what Commander Zexhai had been trying to tell them. The humans weren't just confident soldiers. They were something fundamentally different from every other species he'd encountered. "I'd like to see your troops in action," Commander Thexval said. "We have a training simulation scheduled for this afternoon. Perhaps your people could participate." "We'd be happy to," Martinez replied. "What type of scenario?" "Standard urban assault simulation. A terrorist group has taken hostages in a civilian area. Multiple objectives, complex environment, time pressure. Rules of engagement. Non-lethal simulation rounds. Minimal property damage. Civilian casualties result in immediate mission failure." Martinez nodded. "Understood. How many teams are participating?" 6 squads, representing different member species. The simulation is competitive, so your performance will be ranked against the others." "I see." Martinez turned to her soldiers. "Gentlemen, it looks like we have a training exercise. I trust you'll represent the human military with distinction." "Yes, ma'am," came the unanimous reply. Several hours later, The recruits found themselves in the observation deck overlooking the station's main training facility. The simulation area was a perfect replica of a typical colonial city, complete with buildings, vehicles, and holographic civilians. "There are the human soldiers," Veltar pointed out. Keltar looked down at the training area and felt his stomach clench. The humans were not behaving like any other military unit he'd ever seen. While the other 5 squads were conducting standard pre-mission briefings, checking equipment, and reviewing tactical plans, the humans were doing something completely different. They were spreading out through the staging area, each soldier taking a different position. But they weren't moving randomly. It was clear that they were following some kind of predetermined pattern. "What are they doing?" Krixai asked. "I think they're preparing the battlefield," Veltar said slowly. "Look at their positions." She was right. Each human soldier had taken a position that allowed them to observe a different section of the simulation area. They weren't just studying the mission briefing. They were studying the actual terrain where they would be fighting. "The simulation hasn't even started yet," Kael'tar protested. "I don't think that matters to them," Veltar replied. Down in the staging area, the simulation coordinator, a Vexulon with multiple arm tentacles, was explaining the rules to all 6 teams. The scenario was complex. Terrorists had taken 30 civilians hostage in a shopping center. The hostages were spread throughout the building. The terrorists were armed with both lethal and non-lethal weapons, and there were multiple entry points to the target building. "Each team will approach from a different direction," the coordinator explained. "You'll be scored on mission completion time, civilian casualties, property damage, and team casualties. The team with the highest combined score wins." The other 5 teams immediately began discussing strategies. The Altarian team favored a careful, methodical approach. The Kelrans wanted to use their superior sensors to map the building before making any moves. The Vorthans planned to use their natural camouflage abilities to infiltrate quietly. The humans just listened. "Teams, you have 30 minutes to prepare," the coordinator announced. "The simulation begins at 1,400 hours. Kael'tar watched as the human team gathered around Colonel Martinez. Instead of the animated discussion taking place among the other teams, the humans had a brief, quiet conversation that lasted less than 5 minutes. Then, they dispersed again, each soldier returning to their observation position. "That's it?" Krixai asked in disbelief. 5 minutes of planning. "Maybe they're just that confident," Veltar suggested. But she didn't sound convinced. As the countdown timer approached 0, all 6 teams moved to their assigned starting positions. The Altarians formed a classic assault formation. The Kelrans activated their sensor sweeps. The Vorthans began activating their camouflage systems. The humans simply walked toward the building. "Simulation commencing," the coordinator announced. "All teams are go." What happened next defied everything the recruits thought they knew about military tactics. The Altarian team began a careful advance, using standard cover and move techniques. The Kelrans started mapping the building's interior with long-range sensors. The Vorthans disappeared entirely as their camouflage systems rendered them nearly invisible. The humans charged, but it wasn't a reckless charge. As the recruits watched in amazement, the human team split into 4 groups and simultaneously assaulted 4 different entry points. There was no hesitation, no careful reconnaissance, no gradual escalation. They went from 0 to maximum aggression in the space of a heartbeat. "They're going to get slaughtered," Kael'tar breathed. But they weren't getting slaughtered. As each human team reached their entry point, they didn't pause to clear the entrances or check for booby traps. Instead, they used explosive charges to blow new holes in the building's walls. "They're not using the doors," Veltar realized. "They're making their own entrances." "Why would they do that?" Krixai asked. Their question was answered immediately. The terrorist defenders, who had been positioned to cover the building's normal entry points, found themselves facing attacks from completely unexpected directions. The simulation's artificial intelligence, which had been programmed to represent experienced terrorists, was suddenly dealing with a situation it hadn't been designed to handle. Inside the building, The humans moved with the same fluid efficiency they displayed in the hangar bay. But now that efficiency was focused on violence, and the result was terrifying to watch. They didn't clear rooms methodically. They didn't check corners carefully. They didn't advance by cautious increments. Instead, each team moved through the building like a force of nature, neutralizing every terrorist they encountered with ruthless precision. "Look at their timing," Veltar whispered. She was right. All 4 human teams were moving in perfect synchronization, even though they had no apparent way to communicate with each other. When one team encountered heavy resistance, another team would appear behind the defenders at exactly the right moment. When terrorists tried to use civilian hostages as human shields, human soldiers would materialize from unexpected angles to neutralize the threat. "How are they coordinating so well?" Keltar asked. "The other teams are using advanced communication systems, and they're not moving half as smoothly. I think they planned this entire operation during that 5-minute briefing," Veltar said. "They didn't just discuss strategy. They choreographed the entire assault." On the training floor, the other teams were still working on their initial approaches. The Altarians had successfully reached the building and were beginning to clear the ground floor room by room. The Kelrans had completed their sensor sweep and were planning their assault routes. The Vorthans had infiltrated the building and were gathering intelligence on terrorist positions. The humans were already on the 3rd floor. "Simulation time, 7 minutes, 30 seconds, the coordinator announced. Team 6 has secured 15 hostages. All hostages are unharmed. 0 civilian casualties. 7 terrorists neutralized." Team 6 was the humans. "That's impossible," Krixhai said. "They've been in there less than 8 minutes. But it wasn't impossible. Down in the simulation area, human soldiers were emerging from the building with holographic hostages who showed no signs of injury or trauma. The terrorists they'd encountered had been eliminated so quickly and efficiently that most of them hadn't even had time to threaten the civilians. "Simulation time, 12 minutes, 15 seconds, the coordinator announced. Team 6 has secured all remaining hostages. Mission complete. Total time, 12 minutes, 15 seconds. 0 civilian casualties. 0 team casualties. Minimal property damage." The observation deck was completely silent. Down in the simulation area, the other 5 teams were still working on their approaches. The Altarians had cleared 2 floors and rescued 8 hostages. The Kelrans were beginning their assault. The Vorthans had gathered detailed intelligence, but hadn't yet rescued anyone. The humans were finished. "How?" Kaltar Visperiet. "How is that possible?" Colonel Martinez was speaking with the simulation coordinator, probably providing a mission debrief. But even from the observation deck, the recruits could see that she looked completely relaxed. Her soldiers were checking their equipment and preparing to leave, showing no signs of stress or fatigue. They had just completed what should have been a complex, dangerous mission, and they acted like it had been a routine training exercise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator announced over the facility's communication system, "the human team has achieved the fastest mission completion time in the history of the simulation. They also achieved perfect scores in all categories: hostage rescue, civilian protection, and property preservation." There was a smattering of applause from the observation deck, but most of the alien officers were too stunned to respond appropriately. Furthermore, the coordinator continued, "Review of the simulation recordings shows that the human team identified and neutralized 3 additional threats that our simulation programmers were not aware of. Apparently, the artificial intelligence had developed tactical behaviors that exceeded its original programming parameters." Kael'tar felt that chill run down his spine again. They didn't just beat the simulation. They found problems that the programmers didn't know existed. "And fixed them," Veltar added quietly. Down in the training area, the humans were gathering their equipment and preparing to leave. They moved with the same purposeful efficiency they'd shown throughout the exercise, but now the recruits understood what they were seeing. These weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were predators who had been trained to work together as a pack. Everything they did, from the way they walked to the way they analyzed problems to the way they executed solutions, was focused on one goal: the complete destruction of whatever they identified as a threat. Commander ZXHY was right, Crixhai said quietly. They're not like us. No, Veltar agreed. They're not. As the recruits left the observation deck, each of them was thinking about their upcoming deployment. Tomorrow, they would be working alongside these humans in a real combat situation. After what they just witnessed, they weren't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. Probably both. The mission came sooner than expected. Lieutenant Kael'tar was awakened at 0300 hours by emergency klaxons echoing through the corridors of Kepler Station. He rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his gear, muscle memory taking over as his mind struggled to catch up with the sudden awakening. All hands to battle stations, the station's communication system announced. This is not a drill. All hands to battle stations. By the time Kael'tar reached the main briefing room, most of the other officers were already there. Ensign Veltar and Corporal Crixhai found seats near him, their faces showing the same mixture of adrenaline and apprehension that he felt. Commander Thexval stood at the front of the room, his massive frame silhouetted against a tactical display showing star charts and fleet positions. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. 2 hours ago, the colony on Kepler 7 went silent. Long-range sensors show unknown ships in the system. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Kepler 7 was one of the most important agricultural colonies in this sector, home to over 2 million civilians. Intelligence suggests this is a large-scale pirate operation. Thexval continued. Possibly the Ironclaw Syndicate. They've taken the colony hostage and are demanding ransom from the Galactic Council. The tactical display shifted to show detailed scans of the Kepler 7 system. Red icons marked the positions of enemy vessels, while blue icons showed the location of Galactic Defense Force ships. We're outnumbered 3-1, Thexval said grimly. The pirates have positioned their fleet between us and the colony. They're using the civilian population as human shields. What about evacuation? Someone called out. Impossible. They've surrounded the planet with minefields and defensive satellites. Any evacuation attempt would result in massive civilian casualties. Kael'tar felt his heart sink. This was exactly the type of scenario that had no good solutions. Attack the pirates, and civilians would die in a crossfire. Wait for reinforcements, and the pirates might start executing hostages. Try to negotiate, and other pirate groups would see it as a sign of weakness. However, Thexval continued, we're not going in alone. The human force that arrived yesterday has volunteered to assist. Colonel Martinez stood up from her position near the back of the room. Commander, my people are ready for immediate deployment. What do you need from us? Colonel, this is a delicate situation. We can't risk civilian casualties, and we can't afford to give the pirates any propaganda victories. Are your people capable of surgical precision? Martinez smiled that cold smile the recruits had seen before. Commander, surgical precision is what we do best. She moved to the front of the room and activated her own tactical display. Sergeant Williams, brief the assembled officers on our capabilities. Williams stepped forward and began highlighting positions on the star chart. Our transport is equipped with stealth technology that will allow us to approach the colony undetected. We can deploy directly to the planet's surface and begin operations immediately. What about the orbital defenses? Thexval asked. We'll deal with them, Williams said simply. How? Our scans show at least 50 defensive satellites, plus the minefields. Williams looked at Colonel Martinez, who nodded slightly. Commander, with respect, the fewer people who know our operational details, the better. We'll neutralize the orbital defenses. You can count on it. Kael'tar noticed that the humans weren't being deliberately secretive. They were being professionally cautious. There was a difference, though it was hard to explain exactly what that difference was. What do you need from us? Thexval asked. A distraction, Martinez replied. Keep the main pirate fleet focused on you while we handle the surface operations. Can you do that without engaging them directly? We can manage that, Fex Val confirmed. How long do you need? 6 hours should be sufficient. 6 hours? Fex Val looked incredulous. Colonel, we're talking about a planetary assault against entrenched defenders. Most operations like this take days to plan and weeks to execute. Most operations aren't run by humans, Martinez said matter-of-factly. She turned to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something about how we operate. We don't believe in extended campaigns or prolonged sieges. When we identify a problem, we solve it quickly and completely. But the civilian population, another officer protested. How can you guarantee their safety? Because, Martinez said, we're not going to fight around them. We're going to remove the threat before the pirates know we're there. The briefing continued for another hour, but Kael'tar found himself studying the human officers rather than listening to the tactical details. There was something about their confidence that was both reassuring and unsettling. They acted like this was just another routine mission, despite the complexity and danger involved. When the briefing ended, the various species began separating into their individual unit groups to prepare for deployment. Kael'tar was surprised when Colonel Martinez approached him directly. Lieutenant Kael'tar, isn't it? She said. I understand you're one of the officers who'll be observing our operations. Yes, ma'am. If that's acceptable. More than acceptable. I think it's important for our allies to understand how we work. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. But I want you to understand something first. What's that, Colonel? You're going to see things today that might seem extreme. Methods that might appear unnecessarily violent or ruthless. I want you to remember that everything we do is calculated to minimize civilian casualties and, in the crisis, as quickly as possible. Kael'tar nodded. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because from what I've heard, most Galactic Defense Force officers think humans are just another military unit with slightly different equipment and tactics. We're not. We're something else entirely. She turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. Lieutenant, has anyone ever explained to you why humans were so effective during the Void Hunter War? I heard some stories from Commander Zexhai. Commander Zexhai is a good soldier, and his stories are true as far as they go. But there's something he didn't tell you. Martinez's expression grew serious. The Void Hunters weren't just another enemy species. They were quite possibly the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever seen. Faster than most species, stronger than most species, more ruthless than most species. But you defeated them. We didn't defeat them, Lieutenant. We hunted them to extinction. There's a difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Today, you're going to see what that means. 2 hours later, Kael'tar found himself aboard the human transport ship Relentless, watching the preparations for what the humans called Operation Iron Fist. The ship itself was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Where Galactic Defense Force ships were designed for comfort and efficiency, the Relentless was designed for one purpose: war. Every surface was functional. Every system was focused on supporting combat operations. There were no decorative elements, no comfortable lounges, no recreational facilities. Just weapons, armor, and the tools of destruction. The human soldiers moved through the ship's corridors with the same purposeful efficiency they showed everywhere else. But now Kael'tar could see additional details that he'd missed before. Their uniforms weren't just functional. They were optimized for combat in multiple environments. Their weapons weren't just effective. They were designed to be maintained and modified under battlefield conditions. Even their personal equipment was chosen for maximum utility rather than convenience. Lieutenant, you'll want to see this, Ensign Veltar called from the ship's observation deck. Kael'tar joined her at the viewport and looked out at the Kepler-7 system. The pirate fleet was exactly where their intelligence had said it would be, spread out in a defensive formation between the GDF task force and the planet below. Look at those ship configurations, Veltar said. They're not just pirates. Some of those are military-grade vessels. She was right. Mixed in with the usual collection of converted freighters and aging patrol boats were several heavy cruisers and at least 2 battleships. This wasn't an opportunistic raid. It was a full-scale military operation disguised as piracy. That changes things, Crixhigh observed, using his multiple eyes to study the enemy formation. Those are professional soldiers, not just criminals. Does it change things? Veltor asked. For the humans, I mean? Before anyone could answer, Colonel Martinez's voice came over the ship's communication system. All hands, prepare for stealth approach. We'll be entering the Kepler-7 system in 30 minutes. Combat teams, report to your assigned stations. Kael'tar watched as the human soldiers began their final preparations. But instead of the nervous energy he'd expected, they seemed to grow calmer as the moment of combat approached. Their movements became more efficient, their voices quieter, their focus more intense. It's like they're becoming something else, Veltar whispered. They are, said a voice behind them. The 3 recruits turned to find Sergeant Williams approaching. He was fully equipped for combat, his armor sealed, and his weapons checked. What do you mean? Kael'tar asked. Most species fight because they have to, Williams explained. Because they're threatened, or angry, or defending something important. But humans, we fight because it's what we're designed to do. Combat doesn't make us nervous or excited. It makes us calm. He moved to the viewport and looked out at the enemy fleet. Those pirates made a mistake. They thought they could use civilian hostages to protect themselves. But hostages don't protect predators from other predators. They just make the hunt more personal. What's going to happen down there? Veltor asked. Williams was quiet for a moment. Have any of you ever seen a human city? The recruits shook their heads. Human cities aren't just places where we live, he continued. They're fortresses. Every building, every street, every infrastructure system is designed to be defensible. We've been practicing urban warfare for thousands of years because every human settlement is potentially a battlefield. But this isn't a human city, Crixhigh pointed out. No, but the principles are the same. The pirates think they're safe because they've fortified the colony. But fortifications designed to keep people out can also be used to trap people inside. Williams turned away from the viewport. You'll understand when you see it. But remember what Colonel Martinez told you. Everything we do today is calculated. The next 6 hours were unlike anything Kael'tar had ever experienced. The Relentless approached Kepler-7 using a stealth system that was so advanced it seemed almost magical. The ship's sensors showed dozens of pirate patrol vessels, but none of them detected the human transport as it slipped through their perimeter. The landing was equally impressive. Instead of using the colony's spaceport, which was certainly monitored and probably booby-trapped, the humans deployed directly from orbit using individual drop pods. Each pod was so small and fast that the planetary defense systems couldn't lock onto them. From the observation deck, Kael'tar watched as tiny streaks of light descended through Kepler-7's atmosphere. Each streak was a human soldier, falling at terminal velocity toward the planet's surface. How do they survive that? Veltor asked. Advanced personal armor and inertial dampening fields, Williams explained. He had remained on the ship to coordinate the operation. Each soldier has enough protection to survive a direct impact with a building. What if they land in the wrong place? They won't. Every drop zone has been calculated based on real-time intelligence. They'll land exactly where they need to be. The human soldiers didn't just land randomly. As Kael'tar watched the tactical displays, he could see that each team had landed at strategic points around the colony. Some were near the power plant. Others were positioned around the communications center. Still more had landed near what appeared to be the pirates' command post. They're not attacking yet, Crixhigh observed. No, Williams agreed. They're getting into position. The actual assault will happen all at once. Why? Because pirates are bullies, and bullies rely on intimidation and fear. If you give them time to think, they might start killing hostages out of spite. But if you hit them hard enough, fast enough, they don't have time to think. They only have time to react. On the tactical display, icons representing human soldiers began moving through the colony. But They weren't advancing in formation or following predictable routes. Instead, they seemed to be flowing like water, finding the path of least resistance and avoiding detection. How are they coordinating? Veltor asked. I don't see any communication signals. Human soldiers trained together for years before deployment, Williams explained. They don't need to communicate because they already know what each other will do. Watch. On the display, one team of human soldiers encountered a pirate patrol. Instead of engaging immediately, they waited until a second team was in position to cut off the patrol's escape route. When they did attack, it was over in seconds. The pirates were neutralized so quickly that they didn't have time to send a warning. Surikal, Kaltar Briatid. That's the idea, Williams said. Remove the threats without alerting the rest of the enemy force. For the next 4 hours, the same pattern repeated throughout the colony. Small groups of pirates would simply vanish from the tactical display. Guard posts would go silent. Patrol routes will be disrupted. But there was no obvious sign of a large-scale assault. The pirates must know something is wrong by now, Veltar said. Probably, Williams agreed. But they don't know what's wrong. Some guards haven't reported in, some patrols are overdue, some communication links have gone dark. But that could just be equipment failure or sloppy discipline. They don't have enough information to know they're under attack. Until when? Williams smiled, and for the first time, Kaltar understood why that expression made him nervous. Until we want them to know. 20 minutes later, every human team struck simultaneously. The tactical display exploded with activity as human soldiers emerged from hiding places throughout the colony. But they weren't emerging randomly. Each team appeared at exactly the right moment to hit their assigned target. The power plant went dark. The communication center went silent. The pirate command post was overrun before its defenders could mount response. Guard towers were neutralized. Weapon depots were captured. Transportation hubs were secured. In the space of 15 minutes, the human soldiers had effectively captured the entire colony. How was that possible? Crixai asked. There were thousands of pirates down there. There were, Williams said. But they weren't soldiers. They were criminals who thought they could use stolen military equipment to play war. When real soldiers showed up, they discovered the difference between owning weapons and knowing how to fight. On the tactical display, the few remaining pirate positions were being systematically eliminated. But the humans weren't just winning. They were winning without causing significant damage to the colony itself. Buildings were intact, infrastructure was functional, and the civilian population appeared to be unharmed. Status report. Colonel Martinez's voice came over the communication system. Colony secured. Came the reply from the ground teams. All civilian hostages accounted for and unharmed. Pirate leadership captured. Remaining pirate forces neutralized or surrendering. Casualties? 0 friendly casualties. Minimal enemy casualties. We accepted surrenders when possible. Kaltar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 0 casualties? How is that possible? Because humans don't fight fair, Williams said. We fight smart. Every engagement was planned to give us overwhelming local superiority. The pirates never had a chance. But the orbital defenses, Veltar protested. What about the minefields and defensive satellites? Williams pointed to another section of the tactical display. Take a look. The display showed the space around Kepler 7. The minefields were still there, but they had been reprogrammed to target pirate ships instead of GDF vessels. The defensive satellites had been captured and turned against their former masters. Ow, Crixai asked. Human computer specialists, Williams explained. While the ground teams were securing the colony, our technical teams were hacking into the orbital defense network. It turns out that pirates aren't very good at computer security. Over the next hour, the remaining pirate fleet found themselves in an impossible situation. Their orbital defenses had turned against them. Their ground forces had been eliminated, and their hostages had been rescued. When the GDF task force moved in to finish the job, the pirates surrendered without a fight. Mission accomplished, Colonel Martinez announced. Total operation time, 6 hours, 43 minutes. All objectives achieved. All hostages safe. Colony secure. The observation deck was silent as the three recruits processed what they had just witnessed. Commander Zexhai was right. Kale Tar said finally. They really are different. They're not just different, Veltar said quietly. They're terrifying. If they decided we were enemies instead of allies. But they didn't, Crixhai pointed out. That's what matters. Sergeant Williams, who had been listening to their conversation, turned away from the tactical display. You're all missing the most important point, he said. What's that? Keltar asked. The pirates thought they were safe because they had hostages. They thought that having civilians would protect them from retaliation. Williams looked directly at each of the recruits. But humans don't see hostages as protection for criminals. We see them as additional reasons to hunt criminals down. He paused to let that sink in. Most species try to minimize risk to civilians by avoiding conflict. Humans minimize risk to civilians by ending conflict as quickly as possible. There's a difference. A big difference, Veltar said quietly. As the Relentless began its journey back to Kepler Station, the three recruits found themselves with a new understanding of their human allies. They were indeed predators, as Commander Zexhai had warned. But they were predators who had chosen to hunt the hunters, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That made them the most dangerous allies in the galaxy, and the most valuable. I think I understand now, Kale Tar said as they watched the stars roll past the viewport. Humans don't fight wars. They solve problems. Very dangerous problems, Veltar added. And they solve them permanently, Crixhai concluded. The three recruits returned to their quarters, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. Tomorrow, they would file their reports about the operation. But they knew that words could never truly capture what they had seen. Humans weren't just another species with different tactics and equipment. They were something fundamentally different, something that had evolved to hunt the most dangerous prey in the universe. And that prey, more often than not, was other intelligent species who had chosen the path of violence and oppression. For the criminals, pirates, and tyrants of the galaxy, the message was clear. Humans were coming. And when they arrived, the hunt would be swift, efficient, and final. For everyone else, the message was equally clear. Having humans as allies meant never having to worry about predators again, because the humans had already claimed that niche. And they were very, very good at it.